Snow drifted through the broken sky like ash, softening the sharp edges of war. But beneath the blanket of white, the earth still shook. Daniel's fingers trembled around the camera, not from the cold, but from the nearness of death. Shells had landed close to close. The camera's lens fogged from his breath, and he wiped it quickly, pressing deeper into the shattered remains of a wall. His body curled against the wind, stone biting into his back. A low rumble echoed in the distance. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. He wasn't afraid of war. He had stopped fearing that years ago. But something else clawed at him, now something unspoken and far harder to shake. Rex didn't make a sound. The German shepherd lay motionless in the snow-dusted rubble beside him, ears twitching at the distant echoes, eyes sharp with instinct. He didn't whimper, didn't flinch. He was a soldier in his own right, trained, hardened, but when Daniel saw through a lens, Rex saw everything, felt everything. For a long moment, they were frozen in parallel solitude. Two ghosts of different wars, one human, one hound. Both survived, neither truly living. Daniel's eyes swept the distant alleyways, the crumbled buildings, the fractured sky, but never landed on the creature at his side. He couldn't look at Rex. Not yet. Something about those eyes. They unnerved him to knowing, to steady. Too close to something he used to feel and had buried long ago. Daniel didn't believe in bonds anymore. Not in this world. Not in this place. And certainly not with a dog. Then, without warning, the sky cracked open. The blast hit closer than before, just beyond the next street. The ground shook violently. Shards of brick and metal rained down before his brain could process the danger. Daniel's body reacted. He threw his arm around Rex and pulled him close, covering the dog's body with his own as debris whistled past. Snow and dust blinded his eyes. His heartbeat thundered. Only after the tremor passed did he realize what he'd done. He didn't move, couldn't, because at that moment the dog under his arm wasn't a mission asset. He was something else. Rex shifted under him, lifting his head gently. Their eyes met. No training, no command, just a raw, silent moment. A look that asked nothing, but offered everything. Daniel blinked. His throat clenched. Something moved behind those dark eyes. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. It lasted only seconds. But it settled deep inside Daniel like the first ember in a long-dead fire. Everything is still. No gunfire, no wind, just breath shared in the cold between two forms huddled close together. In the debris of a world that had forgotten how to care, the silence weighed more than the war around them. It was the silence of memories neither could speak of, but both carried, and, for the first time in weeks, Daniel didn't feel entirely alone. He stood slowly, brushing the dust from his coat. Rex followed without a word, his poststeps soft, purposeful. They found shelter in what once had been a Homer hollowed-out room with 3 walls and a missing roof. A single wooden chair remained upright. The rest turned to splinters. Daniel leaned against the wall, exhaled, and glanced at Rex. He finally spoke, his voice dry and low. "You okay, boy?" The words hung in the air, gentle, uncertain, human. Rex looked up at him, eyes calm, as if he understood more than Daniel wanted to admit. Daniel didn't realize it then, but something had shifted. A wall inside him had cracked just slightly, and somewhere in that war-torn silence, trust took its first breath. 2 weeks before the chaos in the snow, Daniel stood in a dusty safe house, surrounded by scattered maps and static-filled radios. He was focused, mechanical. He checked the lenses on his cameras with practiced hands, snapped the buckles on his vest, zipped the side pouch where he kept photos he never looked at. The fixer handed him a worn manila folder, usual coordinates. Protocols, no surprises. But as Daniel flipped through the last page, the fixer added one more line. "You'll be taking a dog," he said, almost casually. Daniel paused. "A dog," he repeated, like it was a joke. "Regulations. Field clearance tightened near the red zones. He's trained for explosives. You'll need him." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't argue, but the look in his eyes said it all. He wasn't here to babysit a stray with a badge. Later that day, Daniel approached the truck that would carry them into the field. He wasn't expecting much. Probably a nervous mutt with more bark than bite. But then he saw him. The German shepherd stood stone still beside the vehicle. Broad chest, still, tail lowered, not tucked, just calm, alert, controlled, his eyes locked on Daniel the second he came into view. There was something in that gaze. Not fear, not aggression, not assessment. Daniel slowed, unsettled. The dog didn't wag, didn't flinch. He just stared, waiting to see what kind of man he'd been assigned to follow. Daniel moved to toss his camera bag into the back of the truck when the sound stopped him. Cold, a growl, low, guttural, not loud, but sharp enough to freeze him mid-motion. He turned. Rex stood exactly where he had, but his stance was different. Now shoulders squared, eyes locked, teeth just barely visible beneath a tight lip. The growl wasn't a threat. It was a line being drawn. Daniel backed off, arms raised slightly. All right, he muttered, touchy, but inside it stung. He recognized that tension. He lived in it himself. The fixer was already lighting a cigarette nearby, watching the exchange. "He doesn't trust anyone yet," he said, exhaling smoke. "Lost his handler last month. Mortar hit the side of the road." Rex pulled him out of the vehicle, waited beside the body 2 days before patrol found him. Daniel looked back at the dog, quiet now, his eyes still tracking every move. "I've seen him take orders without a word," the fixer added, "but only from people. He chooses." Daniel scoffed. "So he picks his humans now." "Don't we all?" the fixer replied. Daniel turned away, the growl still fresh in his ears. "I'm not here to babysit a damn dog," he muttered under his breath, slamming the truck door shut. A little harder than necessary. His voice carried more than annoyance. It was defense, against the reminder that the last time he let himself care, it cost him. A dog with trauma wasn't part of the plan. He was here to document a war, not build. Another bond destined to break. The fixer didn't argue. He just smiled faintly and dropped the butt of his cigarette to the ground. "He'll save your life," he said, "before you even know you're in danger." Daniel didn't respond, but the words followed him into the truck, echoing louder than they should have. The first day in the red zone was a blur of distant gunfire and camera clicks. Daniel stayed focused on his lens, capturing grief and ruin one frame at a time. Rex stayed close, silent but steady. No growls, no warmth, just duty. They moved through a half-collapsed alley, walls leaning like drunks on either side. Daniel crouched to snap a photo. That's when Rex stopped. No bark, no growl, just a freeze. His ears perked, body rigid, tail stiff and low. Daniel looked up. "What is it?" Rex inched forward, then blocked Daniel's path with his body. Seconds later, Daniel spotted a barely buried landmine glinting beneath the dirt. Daniel's chest tightened. He stared at the soil he nearly stepped into, the trap inches from claiming his life. Then back at Rex, who hadn't moved. The dog's body still shielded him, like it was second nature, like it wasn't the first time. Daniel's heart pounded not from the danger, but from the realization that the fixers' words were already true. He didn't know what to say, but for the first time, the camera in his hand felt small. The dog beside him felt enormous. Night fell over the outpost. Wind slid through the broken walls. Daniel sat in the corner of a sandbagged shelter, camera beside him, eyes on the fire. He felt it before he saw it. Rex, lying nearby, was watching. Him, not just glancing, not just alert. Watching, it wasn't a suspicion. It was a curiosity, like Rex was trying to figure out who Daniel was, what kind of man he might become. Daniel met his gaze for a moment, and something softened. Daniel no longer needed to call him. Rex walked by his side without hesitation, his movements fluid and intentional, never too far, never in the way. He didn't follow out of command anymore. He chose to. They moved through rubble and silence, together, sweeping past wreckage and shattered homes, the war an ever-present hum behind them. Daniel noticed it first when Rex stepped in front of him before he could walk into a loose beam. Then again when he stood watch during an interview, body angled just enough to block Daniel's blind spot. Rex had stopped acting like a soldier on duty. He'd started acting like someone who cared if Daniel came back. The mornings were sharp, with wind, bitter air crept under every layer. Daniel usually kept quiet, retreating into his thoughts. But one morning, as he packed his gear, he said aloud, "These batteries won't last another day." He hadn't meant to speak, but when he looked up, Rex tilted his head slightly, as if listening. Daniel gave a short, dry chuckle. "Yeah, well, that makes two of us." From that moment, he kept talking. Little things, mundane comments, muttered curses, then full thoughts, sentences he hadn't shared with another soul in years. He never expected answers, but Rex never looked away. At dusk, when the checkpoints closed and the village went quiet, Daniel and Rex would settle near the camp stove. Rations were split instinctively. Daniel no longer thought twice about laying out a portion for Rex. Sometimes he even saved the better part. And at night, when the sky fell into black silence, Rex would nudge his way against Daniel's side. Without needing permission, he curled in tight, not like a pet seeking warmth, but like a companion saying, "I'm here." Daniel let him. Eventually, he started to sleep better. It happened suddenly. An unexpected burst of shellfire lit the sky in the middle of the night. Daniel jolted awake, grabbing for his vest. But before he moved an inch, Rex was already at his side, pressed into him, not barking, not whimpering, but shaking. Daniel paused. Rex had faced danger with ice in his veins. This was different. His body trembled with a kind of silent desperation. Daniel slowly lowered his hand, resting it on Rex's back. "You're okay," he said softly. Barely a whisper, the dog leaned harder into him, not from fear of the now, but from the ghosts of before. Daniel didn't move for a while. He sat beside Rex in the cold dark, hands stroking slowly down the dog's neck, calming him like you would a child waking from a nightmare. "You've seen too much, huh?" he whispered, his voice cracked, brittle from something deeper than exhaustion. Rex didn't flinch. Daniel's eyes dropped to the floor. Yeah, me too. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. That what haunted him wasn't just what he'd seen, but what he'd survived through, and who hadn't. The next morning, as light touched the shattered buildings, Daniel spoke. Again this time, not just out of habit. My brother used to laugh at how I packed my bags, he said quietly while fixing his strap. Rex sat nearby, ears relaxed, eyes steady. He thought I brought too much. Called me the turtle. A small smile flickered. Didn't stop teasing me, even in the field. He paused. He didn't come home. Daniel didn't expect comfort, but the silence Rex gave him was exactly that. Unjudging, steady, and Daniel realized, little by little, he was starting to breathe easier around the dog. One afternoon, while waiting for clearance at a battered checkpoint, the fixer leaned against a concrete wall, arms crossed. He watched Daniel tie a makeshift bandage around Rex's paw. Nothing serious, just a scrape from sharp rubble. Didn't think you liked dogs, the fixer called out. Daniel looked up. His hand rested on Rex's side. I didn't, he said simply. The fixer didn't press further. He just nodded once, but the message was clear. Whatever Daniel had been before, he wasn't that man anymore. Later, as they moved out through the checkpoint, Daniel reached down and gave Rex a gentle scratch behind the ear. Rex leaned into it, slightly not dramatic. Just enough, Daniel muttered under his breath, a smile tugging the edge of his mouth. Didn't think dogs liked me. Rex looked up with a slow blink, then returned to watching the road ahead. Daniel didn't realize how much lighter he felt until that moment. The days grew shorter, colder. Daniel could feel the shift in the air, like a held breath that wouldn't release. Radio chatter buzzed with urgency. Evacuation routes were closing. Convoys were missing. Nearby towns swallowed by advancing lines. Rex picked up on it too. His ears stayed perked longer. He stayed closer than ever. The quiet peace they'd built began to tremble at the edges. Daniel looked at the map, the red marks growing bolder, and knew what was coming. But when Rex rested his head on Daniel's boot that night, the journalist felt something new. Not just the weight of war closing in, but the fear of losing what had just begun to matter again. Even before the first shot was fired, Rex knew. His body moved differently as high, eyes scanning constantly, paws landing softer than usual as if bracing for something unseen. Daniel could feel it in the air, too, like a slow breath being held too long. The village they entered was quieter than any before to quiet. Women held children tighter. Men stood stiff near broken doors. The fixer spoke in half sentences. No one looked directly at the sky. Daniel kept one hand on his camera, the other near Rex's shoulder, fingers brushing fur more often than he admitted. He didn't know what was coming. Rex did. The camera clicked steadily. Each frame caught what? The world forgot tattered clothing, glassless windows, a boy barefoot in ash. This was why Daniel came here, why he stayed even when his body begged him to stop. But today, his lens wasn't steady. His focus wavered. Rex paced in circles. Not frantic, just alert, unsettled. Every noise made him glance sideways. Every step was calculated. Daniel snapped a photo, then lowered the camera. You good? He asked. Rex didn't answer, of course, but his stillness in response said everything. Something was wrong. Then came the sound, no. One was ready for an explosion that split the sky like thunder. A shockwave hit the village square. throwing dust and bodies into chaos. Screams pierced. The smoke. Daniel dropped the camera. His first instinct was to crouch, call Rex, grab his arm. Anything but Rex was already moving. He bolted through the smoke, ears pinned back, charging toward the blast. Daniel barely caught sight of him, just the flash of his coat vanishing into the grey. "Rex," Daniel shouted, stumbling forward. "Rex." There was no answer. Just the roar of fire, gunshots, and a name swallowed by war. The square was a war zone. Rubble collapsed under Daniel's boots. Blood stained the walls. Smoke burned his lungs. But he kept moving. "Rex," he cried, again and again, pushing past broken carts, fallen fences, crushed bodies. Then through the haze a flicker. "Rex," dragging something, a limp figure. A child. Daniel froze, breath catching. Rex was pulling the child into a collapsing building, disappearing into shadow. A final turn of his head, locking eyes with Daniel, and then he was gone. A beam fell, the dust thickened. Daniel ran forward, but there was no path left. Voices rang out, soldiers yelling, calling for evacuation. "Pull out now, we're exposed." Gunfire cracked down the alley. Someone grabbed Daniel's arm, but he yanked away. "I'm not leaving him." He shouted, coughing on smoke. He called Rex's name again and again, each time louder, throat raw, eyes stinging from ash and panic. A part of him knew how war worked, knew how fast life disappeared in this place, but he couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, not when it was Rex. In the end, he didn't walk out. 2 soldiers pulled him back, half carrying him over fallen bricks, past firelit windows and collapsed roofs. Daniel didn't struggle anymore. He just kept looking back. The camera had been slung around his neck, still running, still recording. He had the footage enough to make headlines, enough to make history. But what he didn't have was Rex, not his footsteps, not his eyes, not the quiet presence that had become the only anchor Daniel trusted. He'd survived, but it didn't feel like it. Weeks passed. The footage aired on every major outlet. Headlines blared his name. Journalist captures final moments in devastated town. There were requests for interviews, panel appearances, and awards. Daniel ignored them all. His phone stayed off. His camera stayed in its bag. He turned the volume down when his face showed up on screen. Every time someone said hero, he flinched. Because what they didn't see, what the footage didn't capture, was the one who ran toward danger without a second thought. The real hero, the one who never came back. Daniel still woke up sweating, not from nightmares of gunfire or collapsing roofs. Not the screaming or the blood. It was the silence that haunted him. The silence that followed the last time he called Rex's name in the darkness of his apartment. He sometimes whispered Etrex, just once, just to hear it again, just to hope. Foolishly, he'd hear the sound of paws on the floor, a soft breath beside the bed, but nothing came. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, a gap where something steady used to be. And for Daniel, that gap had a name and 4 legs. Daniel stood among the murmurs of the memorial service, his face half hidden beneath the scarf he hadn't worn since the evacuation. The town had changed, less rubble, more silence, but the weight in his chest hadn't lifted. He hadn't come for closure. He didn't believe in that word anymore. But then, a voice, low, uncertain. "There's a dog people talk about," the villager said, eyes flicking toward the far edge of town. "Big, wounded, stays near the old church. Daniel turned to look, but the man was already walking away. His heart didn't race. It didn't leap. It clenched tight with something almost forgotten. Hope. He walked alone, past the worn doors and shuttered shops, toward what remained of the church. Every step felt heavier, not from the snow, but from the war still living inside him. The streets looked different now, but the ache in his chest knew the way. Belief wasn't something Daniel had practiced in years, not in miracles, not in return, but something about the way the villagers said it hesitant, reverent made his legs keep moving. He didn't let himself speak Rex's name, not yet, but he whispered it in his thoughts, the way you call to someone who's still alive in dreams. As he neared the crumbled archway, Daniel froze. A low growl rumbled from the shadows behind the wall. Not fierce, but firm. A sound carved deep into his bones. He knew it. His breath caught. His eyes scanned the dim light slicing through broken stone. "Rex," he said softly, barely more than a breath. Silence followed. Then another sound. Faint shuffle of paws over frozen ground. Daniel didn't move. His heart pounded louder than the wind. He knew that sound, too, from the shadows. A figure appeared. Rex, his coat was ragged, dusted in ash and frost. One leg dragged slightly. A scar cut through his left ear. But his eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. He stopped when he saw Daniel. Ears perked, head tilted, and in that moment, the stillness between them cracked. "Hey," Daniel whispered, his throat tightening. "It's me." Rex inched forward, his body still cautious, until he smelled the voice, the scent, the soul he hadn't seen in months, and then everything in him changed. Daniel dropped to his knees, arms open, breath frozen in his lungs. He didn't cry, not at first. Rex closed the distance in a few limping strides and pressed his head into Daniel's chest, firm, familiar, like nothing had ever broken. Daniel's arms folded around him as the first sob escaped a sound pulled from someplace long buried. He buried his face into Rex's neck, repeating the same 3 words over and over. "I'm so sorry." But Rex didn't need apologies. He never had. He just leaned closer, and in that silence, Daniel found something he never expected again. Peace in the days that followed. Daniel heard the stories. Children pulled from rubble. Elderly villagers led to safe roads. A dog they called. The ghost shepherd, seen but never caught, always vanishing before anyone could approach. Some thought he was a spirit, others a myth, but Daniel knew the truth. Rex hadn't disappeared. He had just kept doing what he was trained and born to do. Protect, even when the world forgot him. When they returned home, Daniel didn't unpack for days, but Rex found his place immediately. He circled the corner of the bedroom, pawed at the worn rug, then laid down with a groan the kind dogs make when they're finally allowed to rest. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, hand gently stroking his side. The nightmares still came, but now so did something else. Warmth. He eventually picked up the pen again, not to tell the world what war destroyed, but what it couldn't. He wrote of loyalty that never wavered, of a dog who saved strangers and still found his way back home, of pain, yes, but also of healing. And for the first time, his words weren't about loss. They were about what survived it. Rex lay beside his desk, tail thumping slowly every time. Daniel paused. The final line of his first story read, "He found me in the smoke. A Gandon this time. I didn't let go." Daniel never imagined that rebuilding wouldn't start with bricks or borders. It started with a glance, a silent stare, a shared breath under fire. War had shattered more than cities. It had cracked his belief in people, in permanence, in himself. But Rex, without a single spoken word, fought him something sturdier than cement, a reason to trust. Again, and somehow that felt more powerful than any ceasefire. He never barked orders, never judged, never asked questions Daniel didn't know how to answer. But in every gaze, every brush of fur against his leg, Rex delivered messages that cut deeper than language ever could. You're not alone. You can still be saved. You matter. Sometimes the loudest truths come from silence. Rex's silence healed where the world's noise had only wounded. Daniel used to think home was a location coordinates on a map, but Rex taught him it was presence. A quiet body curled by the door, a pair of eyes that greeted him the same on his worst and best days, a heartbeat that didn't walk away when things got hard. With Rex, home followed him, even in the war. Even after, and for the first time in years, Daniel stopped running. The classroom was quiet young faces leaning forward, hanging on every word. As Daniel finished his talk on war journalism, a boy in the front raised his hand, hesitant. What saved you out there? Daniel smiled and instinctively looked down. Rex was asleep by his feet, head resting on his paws, one ear twitching. Daniel's voice softened. A dog, he said, who didn't give up on me, even when I had. The room fell silent, and in that moment, Daniel knew this was the story that truly mattered.